After I retired, my daughter-in-law dropped off her 3 kids at my house and said, "You raised one man and failed. Let's see if you can handle 3 toddlers. I'm off to yoga. Bye." I smiled and decided to teach her a lesson she'd never forget. When she came back from yoga, she couldn't believe her eyes. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached." I had been retired for exactly 6 months when my daughter-in-law Thalia decided to remind me what a failure I was as a mother. It was a Tuesday morning in October. I remember because I had just finished my 2nd cup of coffee and was looking forward to my daily walk around the neighborhood. At 67, these small routines had become precious to me. After 43 years of working as a nurse, I was finally learning to enjoy the quiet mornings, the unhurried pace of retirement. Then the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Thalia standing on my porch with her 3 children clustered around her like ducklings. Emma, the oldest at 6, was holding the hand of 4-year-old Marcus, while 2-year-old Sophie clung to her mother's designer yoga pants. My heart did that little skip it always did when I saw my grandchildren. Despite everything, they were still the light of my life. I opened the door with a smile. "What a wonderful surprise. Come in, come in." Thalia didn't return my smile. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a perfect ponytail, her makeup flawless even at 9 in the morning. She was wearing a matching yoga set that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Everything about her screamed perfection, from her manicured nails to her designer sneakers. "Wanda," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when she was about to ask for something. "I need you to watch the kids." "Of course, honey. How long do you need me to—" "You raised one man and failed." She cut me off, her voice cold as winter rain. "Let's see if you can manage 3 toddlers. I'm going to yoga. Bye." The words hit me like a slap across the face. I stood there frozen, watching as she turned on her heel and walked back to her white SUV without so much as a backward glance. The children stood in my entryway, looking as confused as I felt. Emma tugged at my cardigan. "Grandma Wanda? Is Mommy coming back?" I forced a smile, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. "Of course she is, sweetheart. She just went to exercise." But as I closed the door and looked down at the 3 little faces staring up at me, Thalia's words echoed in my mind. "You raised one man and failed. Failed." The word lodged itself in my throat like a stone I couldn't swallow. I had raised Darren alone after his father died in a construction accident when my son was only 8 years old, 28 years old, suddenly widowed, working double shifts at the hospital just to keep food on the table and a roof over our heads. I had sacrificed everything for that boy. My social life, my chances at remarriage, my own dreams, everything. And yes, Darren had his struggles. He was quiet, sometimes too passive. He let Thalia make most of the decisions in their marriage, but he was a good man, kind, honest, hard-working. He had never been in trouble, never caused me a moment's worry about drugs or drinking or running with the wrong crowd. How was that failure? But standing there in my living room, watching 2-year-old Sophie's bottom lip start to quiver as she realized her mother was really gone, I felt every one of my 67 years weighing down on me. Maybe Thalia was right. Maybe I had failed. Maybe that's why my son had married someone who could speak to his mother with such casual cruelty. Marcus wandered over to my coffee table and picked up the TV remote. "Can we watch cartoons, Grandma?" "Of course," I managed, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "Let me find something for you." As I fumbled with the remote, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror above my mantel. Gray hair in need of styling, wearing the same old cardigan I'd had for 5 years, lines around my eyes that seemed deeper today. When had I become this woman? This elderly lady that people could dismiss so easily? The children settled on my couch, and I went to the kitchen to get them some juice. My hands were shaking as I opened the refrigerator. Through the window, I could see Thalia's SUV disappearing around the corner. She hadn't even looked back. This wasn't the first time she'd left the children with me on short notice. Over the past year, it had become increasingly common. A quick call, sometimes just a text, asking if I could help out. I always said yes, How could I not? They were my grandchildren, and Darren worked such long hours at the accounting firm. But this felt different. The deliberate cruelty of her words. The way she'd looked at me like I was nothing more than an inconvenience she had to tolerate. Like I was some doddering old woman who should be grateful for any attention from the family. I poured 3 small cups of apple juice, my mind replaying every interaction I'd had with Thalia over the past 5 years. Had I been blind to something? Had I missed signs that she held me in such contempt? When I returned to the living room, Emma was trying to keep Sophie from pulling Marcus's hair while he cried. The cartoon was too loud, Sophie was getting fussy, and I realized with a sinking feeling that I had no idea what their routines were. What time did they nap? What did they eat for lunch? Did Sophie still wear diapers? Emma, honey, I said, sitting down beside her. Does Sophie need to use the potty? Emma shook her head. She still wears diapers, but Mommy forgot the diaper bag. Of course she did. The next 2 hours were chaos. Sophie had an accident on my sofa. Marcus spilled juice on my carpet. Emma tried to help clean up but only made things worse. By the time Thalia returned from her yoga class, my house looked like a toy store had exploded in it. I was sitting on the floor, exhausted, with Sophie on my lap while Emma and Marcus played with blocks I'd found in an old closet. When I heard Thalia's key in the lock, I felt a mixture of relief and dread. She walked in looking refreshed and glowing, her yoga mat tucked under her arm. She surveyed the scene with raised eyebrows. "Well?" she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Looks like you had quite the adventure." I started to stand, Sophie still clinging to me. They were wonderful. We had a good time, didn't we, kids? But Thalia wasn't listening. She was looking at the juice stain on my carpet, the cushions I'd had to flip over to hide Sophie's accident. Her expression was one of barely concealed satisfaction, as if this chaos proved exactly what she'd expected. "Come on, kids," she said, clapping her hands. "Time to go home." "I don't want to go," Emma said quietly. "I want to stay with Grandma Wanda." Something flickered across Thalia's face, but it was gone so quickly I almost missed it. "Don't be silly, Emma. Grandma Wanda is tired. She's not used to taking care of children anymore." As they gathered their things, I helped Emma put on her jacket. "Will I see you soon?" I whispered to her. She nodded solemnly. "Mommy says we might come back tomorrow." Tomorrow. My heart sank. Not because I didn't want to see them, but because I recognized the pattern forming. Thalia was going to make this a regular thing, wasn't she? Using me as her personal babysitter while she went about her life, all while making it clear that she considered me inadequate. After they left, I stood in my quiet house, surrounded by the evidence of the day's chaos. Thalia's words rang in my ears again. "You raised one man and failed." I sank into my armchair and let the tears come. Deep, silent sobs that shook my shoulders and left me feeling hollow inside. Was this what my life had become? Was this all I was worth to my family? But as I sat there in the growing darkness, something else began to stir inside me. Something I hadn't felt in years. It started as a tiny flame of anger, growing brighter with each cruel word I replayed in my mind. Maybe Thalia thought she could break me down, make me feel small and useless. Maybe she thought I would just accept her treatment and be grateful for whatever scraps of family time she threw my way. She was about to learn something about the woman who had raised a son alone, who had worked her way up from nurse's aide to head of pediatrics, who had never backed down from a challenge in her life. I might be 67 years old, but I was far from finished. And tomorrow, when she inevitably showed up at my door again, I would be ready. I was right about Thalia coming back the next day. And the day after that, and the day after that. By Friday of that week, I had established something that might generously be called a routine with my 3 grandchildren. What I had also discovered was far more disturbing than I could have imagined. It started with Emma. On Wednesday morning, the second day of what I now realized was going to be a regular arrangement, I noticed that Emma seemed unusually quiet. She sat on my couch clutching an old stuffed rabbit I'd given her for her 4th birthday, her big brown eyes darting nervously around the room. "Are you feeling okay, sweetheart?" I asked, sitting down beside her. She nodded quickly, but I caught her glancing toward the bathroom. 20 minutes later, I found her standing in my hallway, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Emma, what's wrong?" "I had an accident," she whispered, her voice so small I could barely hear her. My heart broke a little. 6 years old was well past the age for accidents, especially for a child who had been potty trained for years. I cleaned her up and found her some of Darren's old clothes that I kept in a drawer for occasions like this. "It's okay, honey," I told her gently. "Accidents happen." But as I helped her change, I noticed something else. Her little body was tense, like she was braced for punishment. When I accidentally moved too quickly reaching for a clean shirt, she flinched. "Emma," I said carefully, "does Mommy get angry when you have accidents?" She bit her lip and looked away. That was answer enough. The next day brought another revelation, this time about Marcus. The 4-year-old had always been energetic, but I was beginning to realize there was a difference between normal childhood energy and whatever this was. He couldn't sit still for more than 30 seconds. He threw himself against my furniture, screamed when he didn't get his way immediately, and seemed completely unable to follow the simplest instructions. When I tried to give him lunch, he threw his sandwich on the floor and kicked the table leg. "Marcus, we don't throw food," I said firmly but gently. He looked at me with genuine surprise, as if no one had ever told him this before. "But Mommy lets me eat whatever I want." "Well, at Grandma's house, we eat what's given to us, and we say thank you." For a moment, I thought he might have another outburst. Instead, he picked up the sandwich, took a bite, and said quietly, "Thank you, Grandma." The change in him was remarkable. With clear boundaries and consistent expectations, he was actually a delightful child. But it told me something troubling about what was happening at home. Sophie, the youngest, presented her own concerns. At 2 years old, she should have been babbling constantly, trying to form words, maybe even putting simple sentences together. Instead, she barely spoke at all. She communicated mostly through pointing and whining, and when she did try to talk, her words were so unclear I could barely understand them. But the most disturbing discovery came on Thursday afternoon. I was reading to the children when Emma suddenly looked up at me with those serious brown eyes and said, "Grandma Wanda, why does Mommy cry in her room?" My blood ran cold. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "She goes in her room and cries really loud. And sometimes she yells at Daddy on the phone when she thinks we can't hear." Marcus nodded eagerly, apparently excited to contribute to the conversation. "And she throws things. I heard a big crash yesterday." I felt my chest tighten. "What kind of things does she throw?" "Books and stuff. And she says bad words." Emma shushed her brother with a look that seemed far too mature for a 6-year-old. "We're not supposed to tell anyone about Mommy's crying," she said quietly. The pieces were starting to come together, and I didn't like the picture they were forming. Thalia wasn't just using me as a convenient babysitter. She was dumping traumatized, neglected children on my doorstep while she dealt with whatever crisis was happening in her life. That evening, after Thalia had picked up the children with her usual dismissive attitude, I called my son. "Darren," I said when he answered, "how are things at home?" There was a pause that lasted too long. "Fine, Mom. Everything's fine. Why?" "The children seem, I don't know, stressed lately. Emma had a couple of accidents this week, and Marcus is having trouble following simple rules." Another pause. "They're just kids, Mom. Kids have accidents and act out sometimes." But his voice sounded tired, more than tired, defeated. "Are you and Thalia doing okay?" I pressed gently. "We're fine," he said quickly. Too quickly. "Look, I've got to go. Thanks for watching the kids this week. I know Thalia appreciates it." He hung up before I could say anything else. I spent that night lying awake, staring at the ceiling and thinking about my grandchildren. Emma's fearful flinch when I moved too quickly, Marcus's surprise at being given basic boundaries, Sophie's delayed speech, and both older children knowing they weren't supposed to talk about their mother's emotional breakdowns. These weren't just misbehaving children. These were children who were living with chaos, inconsistency, and quite possibly emotional neglect. Friday morning brought Thalia to my door earlier than usual. She looked haggard, Her usual perfect appearance slightly frayed around the edges. Her yoga clothes were wrinkled, and I could see dark circles under her makeup. "I need you to take them for the whole day," she said without preamble. "I have appointments." "What kind of appointments?" I asked, studying her face. She bristled. "Personal appointments. Look, can you take them or not?" I stepped aside to let the children in. Emma immediately ran to the bathroom, another accident waiting to happen. Marcus started bouncing off my walls like a pinball. Sophie sat on my floor and began rocking back and forth, something I'd noticed her doing when she was stressed. "Thalia," I said carefully, "have you considered that the children might benefit from some routine, some structure at home?" Her laugh was sharp and bitter. "Oh, please, don't start with the parenting advice, Wanda. We all know how well that worked out with Darren." There it was again, the casual cruelty, the dismissal of everything I'd done for my son. But this time, I was ready for it. "What exactly do you mean by that?" I asked, my voice steady. She paused, seeming to realize she'd revealed more than she intended. "Nothing. Just nothing. I'll be back later." As she turned to leave, Emma called out, "Mommy, are you going to cry today?" Thalia froze. For a moment, her mask slipped completely, and I saw something raw and desperate in her eyes. Fear, guilt, and underneath it all, a kind of panic that made my nurse's instincts kick in. "No, baby," she said, her voice suddenly gentle. "Mommy's fine." But as she walked to her car, I saw her shoulders shake. Whatever was happening in Talia's life, it was bigger than just using me as a babysitter. Much bigger. That day with the children was different. I paid attention to everything they said, every casual comment about life at home. By the time Thalia returned that evening, I had a clearer picture of what was happening in my son's house. The children were living in emotional chaos. Their mother was having some kind of breakdown. Possibly worse. Their father was either oblivious or in denial. And I was being used not just as a babysitter, but as a dumping ground for problems that were far more serious than I'd realized. As I helped Emma with her jacket that evening, she whispered something that made my heart stop. "Grandma Wanda, I don't want to go home. Can we stay here forever?" I glanced up to see if Thalia had heard, but she was busy strapping Sophie into her car seat, her movements sharp and agitated. "Why don't you want to go home, sweetheart?" I whispered back. Emma's eyes filled with tears. "Because home is scary now." After they left, I sat in my quiet house and made a decision. Whatever was happening in my family, whatever crisis Thalia was having, my grandchildren were caught in the middle, and they were paying the price. I might be 67 years old, and Thalia might think I was a failure as a mother, but I was about to remind her of something important. I had spent 43 years taking care of people in crisis. I knew how to spot trouble, how to document it, and how to protect the vulnerable. Thalia had made a serious miscalculation when she decided to use me as her emotional dumping ground. She was about to discover that this old woman had more fight left in her than she ever imagined. The revelation came on a Monday morning, 3 weeks into what had become my new reality as Thalia's unpaid daycare service. I was helping Emma tie her shoes when she looked up at me with those serious brown eyes and said something that made my blood freeze. "Grandma Wanda, what's a divorce?" I stopped mid-knot, my hand stilling on her laces. "Where did you hear that word, sweetheart?" Mommy was talking to her friend Jessica on the phone. She said she's going to get a divorce and take all of Daddy's money. Emma's voice was matter-of-fact, the way children speak when they're repeating something they don't fully understand. She said Daddy won't know what hit him. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my voice calm. "When did you hear this?" "Yesterday when we were supposed to be napping. Mommy thought we were sleeping, but I was just lying down with my eyes closed." Emma paused, then added quietly, "She also said something about custody, and how judges always believe the mother." I finished tying her shoes with hands that had started to shake. Across the room, Marcus was building a tower with blocks, while Sophie sat nearby, quietly humming to herself. They looked so innocent, so unaware that their world was about to be torn apart. "Emma," I said gently, "has Mommy been talking on the phone a lot lately?" She nodded vigorously. all the time, and she gets really mad when we interrupt her. Last week, she yelled at Marcus for asking for a snack while she was talking to someone about papers. Papers. Legal papers, most likely. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. Thalia wasn't just having emotional problems. She was planning something that would destroy my son and, in the process, use these children as weapons. That afternoon, while the children played in my backyard, I called my friend Margaret. We'd worked together at the hospital for 20 years before she retired to become a paralegal at a family law firm. If anyone could help me understand what I was dealing with, it was her. "Margaret," I said when she answered, "I need some advice about divorce proceedings. Hypothetically." "Oh, honey," she said, her voice immediately sympathetic. "Is this about Darren and Thalia? How did you know? Because I've seen this story 100 times. What's she doing?" I told her everything Emma had overheard, and Margaret's silence on the other end spoke volumes. "Wanda," she said finally, "if what you're telling me is true, your daughter-in-law is building a case. The excessive use of babysitting services, the focus on the mother's capabilities versus the father's involvement, the documented instances of the children preferring to stay with extended family rather than go home. She's creating a narrative." "What kind of narrative?" "That Darren is an absent father who leaves his children with elderly relatives because he can't handle them himself. That the children are happier and more stable away from him. It's a common strategy in custody battles." My stomach dropped. But that's not true. Darren works hard to provide for his family, and the children love being here because Thalia dumps them on me while she's having some kind of breakdown. "The truth and what can be proven in court are two different things," Margaret said grimly. "Has she been documenting these babysitting sessions, taking pictures of the children at your house, recording conversations?" I thought about Thalia's frequent phone calls, the way she sometimes held her phone up when she came to collect the children, claiming she was checking messages. "I think she might be. Then you need to start documenting too. Everything. Times, dates, the condition the children arrive in, things they say about home. If this goes to court, you're going to be a key witness, whether you want to be or not." After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen feeling sick. Thalia wasn't just using me as a babysitter. She was using me as evidence against my own son. The next few days took on a different quality as I started paying attention to things I'd previously overlooked. The way Thalia always seemed to have her phone out when she dropped off the children, capturing images of them running eagerly into my house. The leading questions she'd ask when she picked them up. "Did you have more fun here than at home?" And, "Doesn't Grandma take better care of you than Daddy does?" But it was Thursday that brought the discovery that changed everything. I was in my bedroom putting away laundry when I heard Emma talking to Sophie in the living room. Emma often took on a maternal role with her little sister, a behavior that broke my heart because it meant she was filling a gap that shouldn't exist. "Sophie, you can't tell Mommy about the man," Emma was saying patiently. I froze, a folded towel halfway to the linen closet. "What man?" Sophie asked in her limited vocabulary. "The man who comes to see Mommy when Daddy's at work. Remember? Mommy said it's our special secret." My legs nearly gave out. I gripped the doorframe, straining to hear more. "Uncle Jake?" Sophie said, apparently testing the name. "No, not Uncle Jake. The other man. The one who brings Mommy flowers and makes her laugh. But we can't tell Daddy or Grandma Wanda because it would make them sad." I sank onto my bed, my mind reeling. Thalia was having an affair. Not only was she planning to divorce my son, but she was cheating on him. And she had coached my grandchildren to keep secrets about it. The implications hit me like a physical blow. If Thalia was having an affair while building a custody case, if she was using my care of the children as evidence against Darren, while simultaneously having another man in their home, then everything she was doing was even more calculated than I'd imagined. That evening, I watched Thalia differently when she came to pick up the children. She was glowing in a way I hadn't seen in months, her earlier haggard appearance replaced by something that looked suspiciously like the flush of a woman in the early stages of an affair. "You seem happy," I commented as she gathered Sophie's things. "Do I?" she said. But there was a smugness to her smile that made my skin crawl. "I guess I'm just in a good place right now. Finally. Finally, as if her marriage to my son had been some kind of prison she was escaping from. As she loaded the children into her car, I heard her talking to someone on her Bluetooth. "No, I can't tonight. I have to keep up appearances for a little while longer." She laughed, the sound sharp and false. "Trust me, it'll be worth the wait." After they drove away, I sat in my kitchen and tried to process what I'd learned. Thalia was systematically destroying my son's life, using his children as pawns, and dragging me into it whether I wanted to be involved or not. But she had made one crucial mistake. She had underestimated me. I pulled out a notebook and began writing down everything I could remember from the past 3 weeks. Every conversation Emma had initiated about their home life. Every time Marcus had mentioned his mother's friend. Every instance of Sophie's delayed development and Emma's regression. If Thalia wanted to play games with my family, if she thought she could use an old woman as a pawn in her schemes, she was about to learn something important about the generations that came before her. I had survived being widowed at 28. I had raised a son alone while working full-time. I had climbed from nurse's aide to head of pediatrics in a male-dominated hospital system. I had dealt with doctors who thought they knew better, administrators who tried to push me around, and parents who blamed me when their children were sick. Thalia thought she was playing chess while I was playing checkers. She was about to discover that I had been playing chess long before she was born, and I had never lost a game that mattered. The next morning, I called Margaret again. "I need to know everything about building a counter case," I said without preamble. "Because this woman has declared war on my family, and she picked the wrong grandmother to mess with." Margaret's voice was grim but determined. "Then let's get to work." As I hung up the phone, I looked around my modest kitchen, at the children's drawings stuck to my refrigerator, at the high chair I'd bought for Sophie's visits. Thalia saw this as evidence of Darren's inadequacy as a father. I was about to turn it into evidence of her inadequacy as a mother. The revolution had begun, and it would be silent, methodical, and absolutely devastating. Margaret arrived at my house the following Saturday morning with a legal pad, a digital camera, and the kind of determined expression I remembered from our nursing days when we had to fight administrators for better patient care. "First things first," she said, settling at my kitchen table. "We need to establish a timeline. When did the excessive babysitting requests start?" I poured us both coffee and pulled out the notebook I'd been keeping. About 4 months ago, it started getting more frequent. But looking back, I think the pattern began almost a year ago, right around the time she would have started planning this. Margaret nodded grimly. "What's the frequency now?" 5 days a week, sometimes 6. She drops them off between 8 and 9 in the morning, picks them up between 5 and 7 at night, sometimes later. Margaret's eyebrows shot up. "That's not babysitting, Wanda. That's full-time childcare. And she's not paying you?" "She's never offered, and I've never asked. They're my grandchildren, but that's going to work in our favor. She's been using free childcare for months while building a case that her husband is an inadequate father who can't manage his own children." Margaret made notes as she spoke. "What reasons does she give for needing the childcare?" I flipped through my notebook. Yoga classes, doctor appointments, errands, meetings with friends. She's always vague about the details, and during this time, have you noticed changes in the children's behavior or development? This was the hard part. Talking about my grandchildren's problems felt like a betrayal, even though I knew it was necessary to protect them. Emma's having accidents again, which she hadn't done since she was 3. She flinches when adults move too quickly near her. Marcus can't follow simple instructions and seems to have no concept of boundaries or consequences. Sophie's speech is significantly delayed for her age, Margaret wrote furiously. These are all signs of inconsistent parenting and possible emotional stress. Have they mentioned anything specific about their home environment? I told her about the crying, the phone calls, the friend who brought flowers, the way Emma had asked about divorce. With each revelation, Margaret's expression grew more serious. "Wanda, this woman isn't just building a custody case. She's been emotionally neglecting these children while setting up your son to take the fall for their behavioral problems." She pulled out her camera. "I need you to document everything from now on. Not just what the children say, but their physical and emotional state when they arrive and when they leave, their eating habits, their sleep patterns, their interactions with each other. Won't that seem calculated? Everything about this situation is calculated, Margaret said firmly. The difference is, we're going to be calculating in the children's best interests. Over the next 2 weeks, I became a detective in my own home. I documented everything with the thoroughness that had made me a good nurse. Monday, November 7th, children arrived at 8:15 a.m. Emma immediately asked to use the bathroom, had another accident. Thalia seemed irritated, said, "This is why I need you to take them, Wanda. I can't deal with this behavior." Emma appeared embarrassed and withdrawn. Marcus threw himself on my couch and began hitting the cushions repetitively. Sophie was carrying a dirty stuffed animal and seemed hungry, ate 2 pieces of toast despite Thalia claiming they'd had breakfast. Tuesday, November 8th. Thalia dropped them off earlier than usual, 7:45 a.m. She was dressed up, wearing perfume, seemed excited about something. When Emma asked where she was going, Thalia snapped, "Mommy has important grown-up things to do." Sophie had a diaper rash that looked several days old. Marcus mentioned that, "Mommy's friend brought pizza last night, but we had to eat in our rooms." The pattern that emerged was disturbing. Thalia was clearly prioritizing her affair over her children's basic needs. She was using my care as evidence against Darren while simultaneously creating the very problems she was documenting. But the breakthrough came on Thursday, November 10th. I was reading to the children when Emma suddenly looked up and said, "Grandma Wanda, do you think Daddy knows about Mommy's boyfriend?" I nearly dropped the book. "What makes you ask that, sweetheart?" "Because yesterday Mommy was talking to Jessica again and she said Daddy was too stupid to figure it out. She said men never notice anything until it's too late." Margaret had told me to probe gently when the children brought up concerning topics. "Did Mommy's friend come over yesterday?" Emma nodded. "He brought flowers again, pink ones this time. And he gave Mommy a box with a shiny bracelet in it. Where were you when this happened?" "We were supposed to be in our rooms, but I could see through the crack in my door. They were kissing in the kitchen. My heart broke for her, 6 years old, and she was carrying the weight of adult secrets that no child should have to bear." "Emma, how long has Mommy's friend been coming to visit?" She scrunched up her face, thinking. "Since before Halloween. Maybe longer. He comes when Daddy's at work, and Mommy always tells us to go to our rooms and be quiet." That meant the affair had been going on for at least 6 weeks, possibly longer. And the children were being used as unwilling accomplices, forced to keep secrets that were tearing their family apart. That evening when Thalia came to pick them up, I watched her with new eyes. She was practically glowing, humming under her breath as she gathered their things. When Sophie clung to my leg and said, "Stay, Gamma," Thalia's irritation was immediate. "Stop being difficult, Sophie. We need to go home." "But I want to stay with Grandma Wanda," Emma said quietly. "It's quieter here." Something flickered across Thalia's face, and I realized she was actually pleased by this response. It fed into her narrative that the children were happier away from their father, even though Darren hadn't been home during any of their visits to my house. "Of course it's quieter here," Thalia said, her voice carrying that false sweetness again. "Grandma's house is very peaceful, isn't it? Much more peaceful than home." She was practically coaching them to prefer my house over theirs, all while recording it as evidence against Darren. After they left, I called Margaret. "She's not just having an affair," I told her. "She's flaunting it in front of the children, making them complicit in keeping secrets from their father." "That's parental alienation," Margaret said grimly. "And it's psychological abuse. Those children are being forced to choose between their parents' loyalty, and that's traumatizing. What do? We document everything, and we start building our own case, because when this comes to court, and it will come to court, we're going to make sure those children are protected." The next day brought an unexpected gift. Thalia dropped the children off for what she said would be a long day, and as she was leaving, her phone rang. Without thinking, she answered it on speaker while standing in my doorway. "Hey, baby," a man's voice said, clearly not my son's. "Are you free? I miss you." Thalia's face went white as she realized her mistake. She quickly took the call off speaker, but not before Emma looked up from where she was coloring and said, "That's Mommy's friend, the one with the flowers." Thalia shot me a look that could have frozen fire, but there was nothing she could say. She'd just confirmed the affair in front of me and her daughter. "I'll be back later," she said tightly, and practically ran to her car. I immediately wrote down everything that had happened, including the time and Emma's reaction. If Thalia wanted to play games with evidence, she just handed me the smoking gun. That afternoon, while the children napped, I made another call to Margaret. "She's getting sloppy," I reported. "The affair is making her careless." "Good. Guilty people always make mistakes eventually. How are the children handling all this?" I looked toward my living room, where Emma was curled up on my couch with Sophie, both of them sleeping peacefully for the first time all week. "They're exhausted, Margaret. Emotionally and physically. They sleep better here than they do at home." Emma's started asking if they can live with me. "Document that too. And Wanda? I think it's time we had a conversation with your son." My stomach clenched. He won't believe me. He thinks Thalia is just stressed about being a mother. Then we'll have to show him the evidence. Because if we wait much longer, those children are going to be caught in the middle of a custody battle that could destroy them. As I hung up, I looked around my modest living room, at the children's drawings on my refrigerator, at the toys scattered across my carpet. For months, Thalia had been using this scene as evidence against my son. Now I was going to use it as evidence against her. The revolution wasn't coming anymore. It had arrived, and it was gathering strength with every documented conversation, every photographed moment, every careful note I made about the children's well-being. Thalia thought she was playing a game where she held all the cards. She was about to discover that I'd been building my own deck all along, and when I was ready to play my hand, it would be devastating. The breaking point came on a cold Tuesday morning in late November, 3 days before Thanksgiving. Thalia arrived at my door at 7:30 a.m. with all 3 children and a suitcase. "I need you to keep them for the whole week," she announced, pushing past me into my living room. "Something's come up." I looked at the suitcase, then at the children. Emma was unusually quiet. Marcus was already bouncing off my walls, and Sophie was clinging to a ratty blanket I'd never seen before. "What kind of something?" I asked carefully. Thalia's smile was brittle. "Family emergency. Out of town. Very sudden." It was a lie, and we both knew it. But what concerned me more was the state of the children. Emma's hair looked like it hadn't been brushed in days. Marcus was wearing clothes that were clearly too small for him, and Sophie's diaper was so full I could smell it from across the room. "Thalia, how long has it been since these children had a proper bath?" Her mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something desperate underneath. "They're fine, Wanda. Don't be so dramatic." "When did they last eat?" "They had breakfast," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Emma tugged at my cardigan. "Grandma Wanda, we didn't have breakfast. Mommy said we could eat here." The look Thalia shot her daughter was pure venom. "Emma, don't lie to Grandma." But it was too late. I was already kneeling down, examining the children more closely. Emma's clothes were wrinkled, like she'd slept in them. Marcus had what looked like yesterday's lunch dried on his shirt. And when I checked Sophie's diaper, I realized it hadn't been changed since the night before. "Thalia," I said, standing up slowly, "what's really going on?" For a moment, I thought she might tell me the truth. Her carefully constructed facade cracked, and I saw the same desperate panic I'd glimpsed weeks earlier. But then she pulled herself together, straightening her shoulders and lifting her chin. "Nothing's going on. I just need help with the children while I handle some personal business." "What personal business requires you to be away for a week?" "That's none of your concern." "It is when you're leaving 3 neglected children on my doorstep." The word neglected hit her like a slap. Her face flushed red, and when she spoke, her voice was shaking with rage. "How dare you? How dare you accuse me of neglecting my children? You of all people should understand what it's like to struggle as a single mother." "You're not a single mother, Thalia. You have a husband who works 60 hours a week to support this family. A husband who's never home. A husband who leaves everything to me. A husband who doesn't understand what it's like to be trapped with 3 demanding children day after day." There it was. The truth, finally spilling out in her anger. So you dump them on me 5 days a week while you meet with your boyfriend? The silence that followed was deafening. Emma looked up from where she was playing with blocks, her eyes wide. Marcus stopped bouncing. Even Sophie seemed to sense the tension in the room. Thalia's face went from red to white in seconds. What did you just say? You heard me. I know about the affair, Thalia. I know about the man who brings you flowers and jewelry. I know you've been using my house as evidence against Darren while you destroy your marriage. For a moment, I thought she might deny it. Then her expression shifted into something cold and calculating. Prove it. The challenge hung in the air between us like a gauntlet thrown down, but I was ready for it. I walked to my kitchen and returned with a manila folder. Margaret had helped me organize everything over the past week, and the evidence was damning. Emma told me about the pink flowers and the bracelet, I said, opening the folder. She described your friend in detail. She also mentioned the pizza he brought over, and how you made the children eat in their rooms while you entertained him in the kitchen. Thalia's eyes darted to Emma, who was now playing quietly but clearly listening to every word. Children have vivid imaginations, she said, but her voice was strained. Marcus mentioned your crying fits and the things you throw when you're upset. Sophie has regressed in her speech development, which is consistent with children experiencing trauma at home. I pulled out my documentation, 3 weeks' worth of careful notes and photographs. And then there's this conversation Emma overheard, where you told someone named Jessica that you were going to take all of Daddy's money and that he was too stupid to figure out what was happening. Thalia lunged for the folder, but I pulled it back. You can't use my children against me, she hissed. I'm not using them against you. I'm protecting them from you. That's when she completely lost control. You think you're so perfect, don't you? She screamed, her voice echoing off my walls. You think you were such a wonderful mother, but look how Darren turned out. Weak, passive, boring, no backbone whatsoever. That's your legacy, Wanda. You raised a man who can't even satisfy his own wife. The children were staring now, Emma's face pale with shock. But I didn't raise my voice. 43 years of nursing had taught me how to stay calm in crisis situations. Is that what you're going to tell the judge? I asked quietly. That you had an affair because your husband is boring? I'm going to tell the judge that my children are better off with me than with a father who dumps them on his elderly mother, because he can't handle them himself. And I'm going to tell the judge that you've been systematically neglecting these children while conducting an affair, that you've been coaching them to keep secrets from their father, and that you've been using me as unpaid childcare while building a false case against your husband. Her laugh was sharp and bitter. You think anyone will believe you? I'm their mother. You're just a bitter old woman who can't accept that her son chose someone else. That's when Emma stood up. Mommy, she said, her voice small but clear. You're being mean to Grandma Wanda. Thalia whirled around, her face twisted with fury. Emma, go play in the other room, now. But Mommy, Grandma Wanda is nice to us. She doesn't yell like you do. The moment hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Thalia's face cycled through rage, panic, and desperation. She looked around my living room, at the evidence folder in my hands, at her children who were clearly more comfortable with me than with her. This isn't over, she said finally, her voice low and dangerous. You think you can steal my children from me, but you're wrong. I'll destroy you before I let that happen. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door, leaving the suitcase behind. Where are you going? I called after her. To get a lawyer. A real lawyer. One who'll make sure you never see these children again. The door slammed behind her, rattling my windows. In the sudden silence, Emma burst into tears. Is Mommy going to take us away from you? She sobbed. I gathered all 3 children into my arms, my heart breaking for what they'd just witnessed. No, sweetheart, Grandma's not going to let that happen. But as I held them, I realized that the war had just begun. Thalia was desperate now, backed into a corner, and desperate people were dangerous. I reached for my phone and called Margaret. She knows we know, I said when she answered. And she's going nuclear. Then it's time to call your son. Tonight. Because if we wait any longer, she's going to disappear with those children, and we might not get them back. As I hung up, I looked at the 3 little faces staring up at me with trust and hope. They were counting on me to protect them from the chaos their mother had created. I had been fighting this battle quietly, documenting everything, building my case methodically, but quiet wasn't going to work anymore. It was time for the revolution to become visible, and when it did, Thalia was going to discover that she had picked a fight with the wrong grandmother. Darren arrived at my house that evening looking like a man who'd aged 10 years in the past few months. His usually neat appearance was disheveled, his tie loosened, dark circles under his eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights. "Mom," he said as I opened the door. "Thalia said you're trying to steal our children." Behind him, I could see Thalia sitting in their car, her phone pressed to her ear. Even from a distance, I could see the tension in her posture, the frantic gestures as she spoke to whoever was on the other end. "Come inside, son. We need to talk." The children were already in their pajamas, settled in my guest room watching a movie. I'd fed them dinner, given them baths, and listened to Emma read a story to her younger siblings. The peaceful domestic scene was a stark contrast to the storm brewing outside. Darren sat heavily on my couch, running his hands through his hair. "I don't understand what's happening anymore, Mom. Thalia says you've been filling the kids' heads with lies about her. She says you're trying to turn them against their own mother. Is that what you think I'm doing?" He looked up at me, and I saw the same confused, hurt expression he'd worn as a child when trying to understand why his father had to die, why life had to be so unfair. "I don't know what to think anymore. Everything's been falling apart, and I can't figure out why. Thalia's been so angry, so distant. The kids seem afraid to go home, and now she's talking about divorce lawyers and custody battles." I sat down beside him and handed him the manila folder that had become the center of my quiet revolution. "Before you look at this," I said gently, "I want you to know that everything I've done has been to protect you and those children. Nothing else." For the next hour, I walked my son through everything I'd documented. The neglect, the emotional manipulation, the affair, the systematic way Thalia had been building a case against him while destroying their family. With each piece of evidence, each carefully recorded conversation, I watched his face change from confusion to shock to heartbreak to rage. "She's been having an affair?" His voice was barely a whisper. "For at least 2 months, possibly longer. The children have been forced to keep it secret from you. And she's been planning to divorce me this whole time, while using my care of the children as evidence that you're an inadequate father." He was quiet for a long time, staring at the photos I'd taken of the children's condition when they arrived each day, reading the notes about their behavioral changes, their fears, their innocent revelations about life at home. "Emma's been having accidents because she's stressed," he said finally, understanding dawning in his voice. "Children regress when their world becomes unpredictable, when they're forced to carry adult secrets, when they don't feel safe in their own home. And Marcus can't follow rules because there aren't any consistent rules at home. Thalia has been too distracted by her affair to maintain any structure for the children." "Oh, Sophie's not talking because no one's been talking to her." I nodded, watching my son process the devastation of his marriage and the damage it had done to his children. "What do I do, Mom?" he asked, his voice breaking. "How do I fix this?" Before I could answer, we heard a car door slam outside, followed by sharp knocking on my front door. Through the window, I could see Thalia marching up my walkway, her phone still pressed to her ear. "I know she's in there," I heard her say into the phone. "Yes, I want to file for emergency custody. Tonight." Darren's face went white. "She's really doing this." "Answer the door," I said calmly. "But first, put this in your pocket." I handed him a small digital recorder Margaret had given me. "And remember, everything she says tonight can be used in court." Thalia burst through the door the moment Darren opened it, her face flushed with adrenaline and fury. "I want my children, now." "They're sleeping," Darren said quietly. "I don't care. Wake them up. We're leaving." "Thalia, what's going on? Mom showed me some disturbing things tonight." Her laugh was sharp and hysterical. "Oh, I'm sure she did. Did she show you her little spy journal? Did she tell you how she's been interrogating our children, turning them against me? She showed me evidence that you've been having an affair. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. For a moment, Thalia's mask slipped completely, and I saw the trapped, desperate woman underneath. Then she rallied, her voice rising to a near shriek. So what if I was? So what if I found someone who actually appreciates me, who doesn't leave me alone with 3 children for 12 hours a day while he hides at work? You drove me to it, Darren. Your weakness, your inability to be a real husband, and the children? Darren's voice was deadly quiet. Did I drive you to neglect them too? I never neglected them. I brought them here because your mother offered to help. You brought them here because you wanted free babysitting while you met with your boyfriend. You coached them to lie to me. You made them keep secrets that no child should have to carry. At that moment, Emma appeared in the doorway in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes. Daddy? She said sleepily. Why is everyone yelling? Thalia immediately shifted tactics, her voice becoming syrupy sweet. Emma, baby, come to mommy. We're going home now. But Emma didn't move toward her mother. Instead, she walked to me and took my hand. I don't want to go home, she said quietly. Home is scary. Emma, don't be silly, Thalia said, her voice tight with forced cheerfulness. Home isn't scary. Tell Daddy how much fun we have at home. Emma looked up at her father with those serious brown eyes. Daddy, Mommy has a boyfriend who brings her flowers, and she cries a lot. And Marcus and Sophie and me have to stay in our rooms when he comes over. The silence that followed was deafening. Thalia's face cycled through rage, panic, and desperation before settling on cold calculation. You can't use a child's words against me, she said to Darren. Children don't understand adult relationships. But I do, Darren said quietly. And I understand what you've been doing to our family. That's when Marcus appeared, followed by Sophie, both of them drawn by the voices. The sight of all 3 children clustering around me instead of their mother was more damning than any evidence I could have provided. Kids, Thalia said, her voice cracking, don't you want to come home with Mommy? Can we stay with Grandma Wanda? Emma asked. Please? The defeat in Thalia's eyes was complete. She looked around my living room at her husband, her children, and the evidence of her own destruction. When she spoke again, her voice was hollow. I want a divorce, and I want half of everything. You can have the divorce, Darren said, his voice steady now. But after what I've seen tonight, after what you've put these children through, you'll be lucky to get supervised visitation. The next few months were a blur of legal proceedings, custody evaluations, and family court. Margaret had been right about everything. The evidence I'd gathered became the foundation of Darren's case, and Thalia's own actions buried her. The judge was particularly harsh about the emotional manipulation of the children and the way Thalia had used them as pawns in her scheme. When Emma was asked in chambers where she wanted to live, her answer was simple: with Daddy and Grandma Wanda. The divorce was finalized on a sunny day in March. Darren got primary custody, with Thalia receiving supervised visitation every other weekend. The house went to Darren, along with most of the assets. Thalia's affair partner had mysteriously disappeared once the legal bills started mounting. But the real victory came 3 months later, when Darren and the children moved into the house next door to mine that had just come up for sale. We'd torn down the fence between our yards and created one large space where the children could run freely between both homes. On a warm Saturday evening, I sat on my back porch watching Emma teach Sophie how to plant seeds in my garden, while Marcus and Darren worked on building a treehouse. The peaceful domestic scene was everything I'd been fighting to protect. Emma looked up from the dirt on her hands and smiled at me. Grandma Wanda, are you happy? I looked around at my family, whole and safe and healing from the damage Thalia had inflicted. My son was laughing again, really laughing, as Marcus tried to hand him the wrong tool for the 3rd time. Sophie was chattering away, her speech improving daily now that she had consistent attention and love. Yes, sweetheart, I said, pulling her onto my lap. I'm very happy. As the sun set behind us, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I thought about Thalia's cruel words that first day. You raised one man and failed. She'd been wrong about everything. I hadn't failed at raising my son. I'd raised a man who was strong enough to fight for his children when it mattered. A man who chose love over pride, truth over comfort. And more importantly, I'd proven that this old woman still had plenty of fight left in her when her family was threatened. The revolution hadn't just been silent. It had been complete, devastating, and absolutely victorious. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's being the grandmother who saves her grandchildren, the mother who protects her son, and the woman who refuses to be underestimated by anyone who thinks age makes you weak. I was 67 years old, and I had never been more powerful in my life. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.